and good afternoon, viewers. Welcome to Futsal868 Corner Talks. My name is Geoffrey Edwards, series moderator and president of the Futsal Association of Trinidad Tobago. Today, we take a moment to recognize our Caribbean brothers and sisters who have been gravely impacted by the passage of Hurricane Elsa. Roofs were blown off homes, trees toppled, utility infrastructure compromised, and massive flooding across the islands. Our prayers goes out to each and everyone affected. Futsal868 Corner Talks is an online meetup series where global sporting professionals meet. The rescheduled 2021 Summer Olympics, officially the games of the 32nd Olympiad, is scheduled to be held from the 23rd July to the 8th of August in Tokyo. With this as our backdrop, Futsal868 Corner Talks will be hosting the four-part series entitled Jeux Olympiques. According to its website, the International Olympic Committee is a not-for-profit, civil, non-governmental international organization made up of volunteers, which is committed to building a better world through sport. It redistributes more than 90% of its income to the wider sporting movement, which means that every day the equivalent of $3.4 million goes to help athletes and sport organizations at all levels around the world. The Olympic Charter, its first published in 1908, is a codification of fundamental principles of Olympism and the rules and bylaws adopted by the IOC. It governs the organization, actions, and function of the Olympic movement and establishes the conditions for the celebration of the Olympic Games. Today, in episode 59, we discuss Rule 50, found in Chapter 5 and Section 3 of said charter. Our guest is Mr. Brian Lewis, President of the Caribbean Association of National Olympic Committee and the President of the Trinidad Tobago Olympic Committee. We want to say a great thank you, Mr. Lewis, for joining us today.
It's a pleasure to you and your team at Futsal868 and everyone listening, and in Trinidad Tobago and in the Caribbean, my Caribbean friends and colleagues. CANOC, making a difference. CANOC, the Caribbean Association of National Olympic Committees. Yeah.
Before we start, let's look at Rule 50, as we said, found in Chapter 5 and Section 3 of the IOC Charter. And it reads, Rule 50, Advertising, Demonstration, Propaganda. 50.1, except as may be authorized by the IOC Executive Board or on exceptional basis, no form of advertising or other publicity shall be allowed in and above the stadia, venues, and other competition areas which are considered as part of the Olympic sites. Commercial installations and advertising signs shall not be allowed in the stadia, venues, or other sports grounds. 50.2, no kind of demonstration or political, religious, or racial propaganda is permitted in any Olympic sites, venues, or other areas. Of note, Rule 50.2 of the Olympic Charter, which is aimed at preserving the protection and neutrality of sport at the Olympic Games and neutrality of the Games themselves, Mr. Lewis. On the 20th of July 2020, you were quoted as saying Rule 50 has racial discrimination and inequalities as its foundation. Any review of Rule 50 must acknowledge that historical fact is not a question of rewriting history, it's already written. Please start us off as regards to this Rule 50.
Well, you read 50 and the preamble, I call it, but it's really 50.2. The nexus of the matter is 50.2. And if you're not prepared to have a talk about race, then you don't want to talk about 50.2. Because at the end of the day, the genesis, the beginning of Rule 50, and in particular Rule 50.2, it came about from Avery Brundage, the then IOC president during the period 1968, the 60s, 1968 Mexico Olympics, 1972 Munich in particular, with you had the imagery up at the beginning of your program, John Carlos, Tommy Smith, and Peter Norman, the white Australian, and the iconic fists. And then in 1972, you had Vince Matthews and Wayne Collett, two African American athletes who had a peaceful protest at the on the podium. Interestingly enough, Vince Matthews and Wayne Collett were banned for life, and to this day, their ban has never been rescinded. And all the people who talk about racial justice and the IOC needs to change this and the IOC needs to change that and the IOC is guilty of this and guilty of that, they have forgotten Vince Matthews and Wayne Collett. So anytime you want to have a conversation about 50.2, you must start with Vince Matthews and Wayne Collett because their ban is still in place. So the context of it is important. It's an uncomfortable conversation that even black-colored, Latino people, Asian people don't like to go there. And as a result of that, 400 centuries later, since Rule 50.2 came in place, you still have Gwen Berry, the Black American athlete, who didn't stand ramrod straight for the anthem, has been wrongly trolled and dragged and criticized, in particular by conservative America. You still have all of this time later. It's almost as if the ban and the sacrifice that Vince Matthews and Wayne Collett made, and John Carlos, Tommy Smith, and Peter Norman, and all the hundreds of African Americans who have been lynched, dogs sucked at them, who have been incarcerated, abused, castigated, called thugs, discriminated against. It's almost as if it has been in vain. Nelson Mandela's 27 years in Robben Island, 18 in solitary confinement because we have soul care. So, unless you really want to talk about race, then it makes no sense talking about 50.2. Let's talk about something else. Let's talk about who's going to win medals at the Olympic Games coming up. Because as long as you are either black, brown, Asian, First Peoples, Latinos, in the Eurocentric, white, global Olympic and sport movement, it's like being in an abusive relationship. And it's not that the people, I don't focus on the individuals and the collectives, because as far as I look at it, they are just symptoms or role players in a system. The system of racism, the system of sexism and ableism. As a result of that system, those deemed minorities always have to be more exceptional than white people, and those who are beneficiaries of white privilege in the Eurocentric Olympic and sport movement.
What a way to start off the conversation. And for those who do not know what the Soul Cap issue is, it's very interesting that Mr. Lewis would have brought it up.
But why would say that? How could you talk about 50.2, and which is a symptom, and we're not touching on something that is happening as we speak?
Well, agreed, because I have the picture up. As a matter of fact, in terms of from where the director sat, we were going to bring it lower down in the conversation, but you have now, through the ebb and flow of this conversation, brought it high up. So for the sake of those who are viewing, we have a picture from their website, the organization. Soul Cap is a Black-owned British brand that makes swimming caps to fit over and protect.
You know that for sure?
Well, that is what is on their site.
Right? So we're going to know who are the financiers and the directors. But go ahead.
Correct.
Carry on.
Correct. So let's base on what is on their site to protect dreadlocks, afros, weaves, hair extension, braids, and thick and curly hair. It has been announced that they have been banned for use in the upcoming Tokyo Olympics. The International Swimming Federation said the caps made by the Black-owned British brand Soul Cap do not, and I quote, fit the natural form of the head, end quote, and to their, quote again, best acknowledge that athletes competing at the international events never use, neither require caps of such size and configuration. Mr. Lewis, you were saying as regards to the backers, the financiers, but nevertheless.
I was just saying that because I remember seeing something in one of the things about Speedo, but I don't want to get into that because I don't know, but I'm saying that one thing I don't do is get chained up by a lot of these things. To me, the focus is, and what I'm more interested in is that for an institution, a company, an organization, individuals, a group to feel comfortable that they could use that language in the year 2021 says a lot. Now, to be fair, and we must be fair, I'm quite sure there is a process by which you have to apply to any international body, even Futsal, even FIFA, for the use of a change of equipment or an amendment of equipment or uniform. That's part of the regulatory role of an international sport body. So I don't fundamentally have an issue with the fact that Soul Cap may have had to go through a process. Now, whether they did that process on a timely enough basis to give FINA, which is the International Federation controlling swimming, time to go through whatever process they have, that's a different aspect of it. But that being said, the fact that somebody could have articulated the process at this point in time, that the way they have done and felt comfortable, is reflective of a system. A system of racism that shows out that, because it meant that nobody in this process thought, well, okay, before we issue this statement, let's vet it, given the time we live in. So it speaks to a level of comfort using racist tinge language that is instructive. And until we embrace the uncomfortable conversation, even programs like this, you're doing all these good things, but we tend to be superficial because it is painful. It's painful. It's like the use of the word nigger by white people. Whereas, the rap artists and hip hop artists could use it. And people say, but if they could use it, why you can't use it? But that is an oversimplification of the deeper issue. What's the deeper issue? The word nigger has a history behind it. It represents a lot of pain, a lot of atrocities. It was used in a way that was aimed at denigrating. And they're whipping you, whom, once that as whom. It was used as an insult, a way to demean you. And it's the same thing that many of people, maybe you yourself, far less the IOC, don't understand that 50.2, just that rule, does the same thing, because it was intended to oppress and suppress the fight at a point in time of our history against racial injustices. And that is why today, most of the people cleave towards the entertainment value of sport. So they don't care that Vince Matthews and Wayne Collett was dealt this injustice by Avery Brundage and by Rule 50.2. So they don't equate that suppression, that oppression, that life ban with 50.2. So 3,500 athletes do it, mainly white. But you have 11,000 athletes going to the games over the years. But you know what they say about statistics, surveys? Because it's superficial. As Thomas Bach said, the IOC president, in a dismissive, defensive way. And Thomas Bach has done a lot positive for gender equality and Agenda 2020 and a lot of good things. But his view is that he doesn't intend to rewrite history in the conversation of 50.2. So they have done now, some have said, a lot of the Western white media have said that it was because of social justice activism by mainly liberal white people that they added some other elements to make 50.2 palatable. Of course, Christy Coventry from Zimbabwe is the chair. But again, nobody, all who says yes, the IOC has made progress. Vince Matthews and Wayne Collett still in proverbial jail. They're in the Olympic doghouse. They're in the Olympic version of solitary confinement. One have died. Gone to the grave with that scar and chain of the legacy of Avery Brundage. That is 50.2. But everybody wants to have a polite conversation about it because it is entertainment value.
You mentioned the athletes and the 3,500 survey.
3,500, yeah?
3,500, 3,500 persons surveyed. This, for those who are listening, this is the 3,500 athletes that were surveyed over the past year.
No, 3,500 athletes who responded.
Responded,
Yeah.
well said. Based on IOC, it says that 70% said it was, and I quote, not appropriate to demonstrate or express their views on the field of play or at the opening and closing ceremony. The survey also showed 67% of respondents disapproved of podium demonstrations. So this is in what Mr. Lewis is speaking about. Now, let's fast forward. On April 21st, the IOC Athletes Commission made recommendations on Rule 50, which was fully endorsed by the IOC Executive Board. 2 days ago, on July the 2nd, these recommendations became guidelines. Of note, the biggest, relatively speaking, that is, are that athletes be allowed to engage in a moment of solidarity against discrimination during the opening ceremony and to wear clothing with words like peace, respect, inclusion, equality, solidarity that express Olympic values. The IOC said that the athletes who should express their views may do so during media interviews, press conferences, and team meetings on social media and other platforms as long as they comply with legal legislation. Crucially, through the podium and the field of play, the two most visible platforms, one, a literal platform for athletes looking to send a message, remained no protest zones. As I say, Mr. Lewis, a wise man told me last year, December, that we have to be mindful of what is expressed in the media because there's more in the mortar than epistle. What would you say to these recommendations that then became guidelines, noting that they use such strong terminologies, such strong words, that it could only speak to certain words that you alone, the Olympic values. Well, the podium is off limit.
Well, most important, let's acknowledge, in fairness to the IOC, it's their event, it's their game, and they have the right to set their rules. And they, and a number of the executive board, obviously, the Athletes Commission, feel that they have taken a very important and historical step forward in terms of making Rule 50.2 more palatable. And like a lot of things, that will probably make a lot of people happy. But it doesn't change the core issue that Rule 50 and 50.2, the origin and the history of it. So other more progressive organizations have acknowledged their history and where it is that they feel it's necessary, apologize for it and acknowledge it, and find ways to move it forward. The IOC, in typical Eurocentric fashion, on issues of colonialization and slavery, and the time when Europe dominated the world and built its wealth and its societies on the blood and the backs of first people, indigenous people, black, colored, brown, Asian, Latino people. And when women was, along with black people and colored people, property. Those who have benefited from the system will not want to change the system. So as long as they can make incremental changes to appease the masses, without acknowledging the history and legacy of every bondage, they have found a way over the years to continue to normalize it. And there are those who are comfortable with that because there are many people who benefit from the system that is the Olympic movement. Not the athletes, but many others.
Mr. Lewis, the US Olympic and Paralympic Committee told their athletes that they would not be subjected to any violation rules if it is that they use that platform during the trials to protest or use Black Lives Matter. Also, there's organizations in Germany that said that any athlete who needs legal support, they would stand up for them. Do you think that we would have athletes using the platform, as well as do you think that persons would support them, organizations would support them? Because it's very interesting to note, because in that same article that was written in the Newsday, you said, I know there are people in the international sport movement who are hoping Black Lives Matter will be a temporary fad and talking point. To those who wish to diminish and marginalize this issue, I say no more.
Well, there are those who have been hoping that for 400 centuries. So it continues. The games will go on. COVID-19, I mean, a lot of good effort has been made to ensure that it is biosecure and safe. And the IOC has done what they and the Athletes Commission and Executive Board and the 3,500 athletes and the NOCs, majority of NOCs across the world, will be happy about that. That's additional opportunities for expression, freedom of expression, as it's called, has been provided, and with the exception of they're protected the neutrality, as they call it, of the Olympic, the victory podium and the field of play and some ceremony. So we'll see how that goes. I mean, I can't see the IOC and the US Olympic and Paralympic Committee controlling Kevin Durant and Gwen Berry and the USA in particular basketball team, men in particular and women most of the players have been very vocal in the last year, especially with the Black Lives Matter. The US women's football team in particular. What are they going to do? Naomi Osaka has been very vocal on issues of racial injustices. Adam Gremley of UK was already qualified, say he will not be stopped. We saw Noah Lyles, the US 200-meter sprinter, raised a glove fist before one of his events. So in that score, it's going to be interesting. And even though the IOC has tried to, make certain adjustments, but they feel will cut off the issue at the pass, so to speak. We'll see.
I want to jump to Rule 50 and freedom of speech and expression that you would have touched on in the beginning of your last contribution. It is very confounding how a private Swiss association can, some people would say, unfairly impinge upon the fundamental right of freedom of speech and expression enshrined under global covenants like the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union, Article 11, European Convention on Human Rights, Article 10, Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 19, International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, Article 19. As per the European Court of Human Rights, the right can be restricted in certain cases provided the restriction is construed strictly and the need for such restriction is established convincingly. Do you think that Article 50.2, this is a rhetorical question, but do you think that it is construed strictly and the need for such restriction is expressed convincingly?
Well, remember you just said something inside of what you just said that was very important. It's a private organization. As I was saying earlier, you can't have I will use the word fear, conversation on race as it relates to the Olympic and sport movement, global Olympic and sport movement in respect of 50.2. You can't have that conversation and not acknowledge that the description you gave about the International Olympic Committee and that they are within their rights to set their rules and regulations as they see fit. So that's not, I recognize that. And there are those who will say that you have a choice. Don't go to the people game, don't participate, don't be involved. The rules are the rule. So even though there are those of us who may take a strong position, we are at least swimming against the tide of conservatism. And as I was saying earlier, and those who benefit from the system. And it's not just, it's all races, genders, and ethnicities who benefit from the system. So it's not everyone who you think is an ally is really an ally. And while you and Futsal 868 focusing on the International Olympic Committee, because of Rule 50.2, you're also giving your body, governing body, FIFA, a free pass. Maybe because they don't have 50.2, but they are beneficiaries of the system, right? They are recognized and part of the International Olympic Committee. That's why you have football on the Olympic program. So I say that just to highlight that while there is a focus on the IOC, it's a very big, broad and ecosystem. And the basic and core attributes of the International Olympic Committee go back over 3,000 years in antiquity. So that's why I tell people, it's hard for me sometimes to engage with conversation because people want to keep it narrow and simple and only talk about the symptoms. You know, I don't normally like to engage in conversations where I sense that the only agenda that may be on the table or under the table is clickbait and you know, just to gather, you know, credibility or props, because then we're not honoring the blood, sweat, and tears of those who have gone before in this ongoing battle to dismantle systemic racism.
Mr. Lewis, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because as the president of the Caribbean Association of National Olympic Committees, very difficult. As a matter of fact, there's no such a difficult question to Mr. Brian Lewis. One of our Caribbean athletes goes to Olympic Games and violates Rule 50.2. What support would CANOC provide for said? That's one. And two, in the continued education of our promising athletes, how do we continue to deal with, and also administrators, because you were part of a Twitter space recently, very much impressive to say the least, speaking to the young administrators, sporting administrators, the next generation of sport administrators. What would you say to them, passing on the battle as regards to fighting systemic racism that we have discussed for over a year?
Well, let me correct you. I don't know what you mean by I've discussed it over a year. I grew up in Belmont, Port of Spain, Trinidad. And that where the period I grew up, Black Power, and it was a hub of social activism. So the issue of intolerance and discrimination, not only because I'm Black, but whether it's because of women, disabled people, on the basis of gender. So intolerance and discrimination on the whole. So it's not just the last year. I've been involved in sports since I'm small, as they say. So, and I've been involved in the Olympic movement since 1997. And on my international travels, I myself have been subjected to racism. So this is not a one-year thing. And I wouldn't disrespect and dishonor our ancestors and those who have fought tirelessly and sacrificed blood, sweat, and tears the last over a course of 400 centuries to narrow it down to a one-year thing. In terms of passing the baton, it is the responsibility of everyone to decide what matters to them. From the way I have seen the silence on very important matters, it is obvious that it don't matter to many people. They prefer either to be popular, as I said, or to make sure they could get along in the system. Remember I said, and I continue to say, those who benefit from the system will not want to change the system. In terms of the Caribbean Association of National Olympic Committee, in a very real sense on this particular matter, the Caribbean Association of National Olympic Committees have almost no local standard, because it is the individual National Olympic Committees that are recognized. It is just like FIFA and any other international body. In the Olympic movement structure, you have Pan Am Sports, which is comprised of the 41 Americas, countries of the Americas, and Central Caribbean Sports. And you have CANO, which is the Caribbean, Spanish, French, Dutch, and English, Papimento. So what's the reality? The reality to the question you asked, I have gone public a while now and said that the Trinidad Tobago Olympic Committee in itself will not take any action against any athlete who choose to conduct themselves in accord with their conscience as it relates to freedom of expression. Of course, at the end of the day, no freedom is absolute. So even under the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, Article 19, they give basic parameters of what is acceptable or not. So any freedom of expression that is compatible with the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. Will not. If you choose to conduct yourself in an offensive, odious manner, of course, we will have to take a look at it. But peaceful,
You have a question?
that is in accord with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights.
We have a question coming in from one of our YouTube followers. If I am getting the point right, the individual members, international federations, have a role in the existence of Rule 50.2. What pressure is being put on them?
By
Thank
who?
you very much, Bernard Charles, for your question.
Thank you for the question, Bernard. But by who? By who? Pressure by who? The pressure on any international federation or group has to come from within the group. Must. If it is that in FIFA, the majority of people are comfortable and don't see anything wrong, who's going to put the pressure? What happens then if Geoffrey Edwards and Bernard Charles decides that they will have a problem with that and they will do their part, they have to accept that they run the risk of being voices crying in the wilderness, but they must remain indomitable and must be prepared to stand up for the courage of their conviction, mindful that in the main, if you are in the minority, there will be consequences. And you must be prepared to face those consequences. But
Mr. Lewis, before we continue, before we go on a quick break, I love the conversation. I want to ask a straightforward question to you. Can it be said that you are in the minority? You have been consistent with your message. Are you prepared to deal with any consequences that come your way as regards to standing up for me, for myself? And thank you very much for doing such. As much as I have to stand up for myself, because as my parents always say, son, we could pray for you as much, but you have to pray for yourself too. Are you prepared for consequences?
Well, I don't know what is it. I don't see standing up for what you believe and trying to make a positive difference for the youth and young people using the power of sport. Has there been any consequences? I came into sport because of the positive difference sport played in my life as a the eldest of 4 children brought up by a single parent mother in Belmont, who had a chip on his shoulder and an attitude because he didn't have a father. The role that sport played in my life and people involved in sport, I always told myself that I will pay it forward and I will give other young people who may be deemed at risk in particular, get them to get the opportunity to interact in sport and see the power of sport in their lives. So if one young life can be transformed by their involvement in sport, and that moves them from possibly ending up in jail or dead to becoming a productive, contributing citizen, then I don't look at the consequences of being done, of trying to build a critical mass of people to make change in the global sport and Olympic movement as it relates to systemic racism and sexism, I might add, and ableism and other forms of intolerance and discrimination. I don't see the consequences.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. We're going to take a quick break, and afterwards we will be back to further discuss Rule 50. But as Mr. Lewis says, not Rule 50 alone. It's Rule 50, 50.2, and racism in sport. We'll be right back. You're watching Futsal868 Corner Talks. We commenced the series in July. We'll be right back.
Jerusalem, ikayalami ilonoloze uhambe nami zungangishilana dawo yami ayikholana buso wami awukholana ilondoloze.
And we are back to episode 59, Futsal868 Corner Talks. We have with us Mr. Brian Lewis, President of the Trinidad Tobago Olympic Committee, speaking Rule 50. We termed it Rule 50. Mr. Lewis have expanded to racial discrimination.
Don't forget the Caribbean Association.
And yes,
National Olympic Committees.
Correct. And with that being said, I also want to highlight another position, Mr. Lewis, the task force head at the Sport Integrity Global Alliance. I remember when that announcement came about, it was after a series of you speaking to this topic and also as regards to inequality. What has come as regards to the relation that you have with SIGA? What has come out of that task force? And how do you see, you have spoken before, but how do you see that in relation to the Olympic and the Olympic movement presently?
Well, what you're alluding to is that it has moved from being a task force to a standing committee. So it's now a Sport Integrity Global Alliance Standing Committee, and the standing committee is called GRID, Gender, Race, Inclusion, and Diversity. And I have the honor of chairing that committee, and it's a multi-ethnic, broad, inclusive, and diverse committee. It's been a very interesting experience, a lot of robust conversation because you're dealing with different, as I said, ethnicities, etc. But it also highlights the, at times, feeling of futility, because as I said, it's like trying to empty the ocean. This whole issue of systemic racism, sexism, ableism, the whole culture of intolerance and discrimination. So at times you really feel like you're trying to empty the ocean, Every day, as I said, let's not get away. I mean, that in 2021, you can have the kind of language used to ban the soul caps. So, the fact that if you took a look at the management, you must look at the snapshots of the management and the decision making on the head table of most international federations. You will see a lack of diversity and inclusion. And might I add, it's not that it's only sport, because you have the same issue in industry, be it technology, banking, finance, insurance. You go through the whole gamut. So it ought to be a reminder that we still have whatever gains and progress we have made, we still have a long way to go.
The IOC has not yet stated what consequences athletes may face for violating the rule. Chess or all fours? Do you think that the IOC is being strategic in not revealing its hand as the consequences athletes may face for violating the rule?
Yeah, and if I were in their position, I would do the same thing. And if you were in their position, you would do the same thing. You have to, that's what I tell people, you can't get all, tied up like a market crab. They have to do that. They don't want to signal and come out and take a course of action and then have to deal with Kevin Durant and, as I said, Naomi Osaka saying, if that's the case, I ain't coming. So what is going to happen? They're going to take it on a case-by-case basis. They're going to play it by ear. And as I said, if you and I were in their position, we would do the same thing. This is a real hot potato. I mean, they have taken certain steps. They have tried to make sure that, they will appease those who are maybe so inclined and have set a parameter. But if you look at it from a pure governance perspective, the fact that you don't know what is your penalty, that's not even going to stand up in any court from a criminal perspective or a civil perspective, because you must know. You must know. But as I said, I don't want to demonize the International Olympic Committee, because at the end of the day, as I said, for now, I'm a part of the International Olympic Committee. I do hold a responsible position at this point in time as president of the Trinidad Tobago Olympic Committee and the Caribbean Association of National Olympic Committee. And as you said, I'm chairman of the Sport Integrity Global Alliance Gender, Race, Inclusion, and Diversity Standing Committee. So that it's one of these challenging situations. Sometimes people misunderstand it and say, yeah, you're compromising or you're sitting on the fence. But we, no matter even as strongly as we may feel about what we are doing, we must also be mindful we mustn't ourselves become the oppressor. Because people are entitled to their views, opinions, and they have certain rights, even on the other side of the table. And so that's important. And then we must also ourselves not display intolerance and discrimination. So we can't on one hand be championing the cause of tolerance and non-discrimination and racial justice and social justice, and ourselves be found guilty. So there is this balance. I tend to use the example for people to get it, to kind of get an understanding. Sometimes don't do always a good job, but it's like comparing the approach of Martin Luther King, early Malcolm X, Nelson Mandela, Mahatma Gandhi, Jesus Christ. Because I say Jesus Christ not to offend those who may be secular, atheists, or agnostic, but I look at, when you look back at humankind, I look at Jesus Christ as one of the early revolutionaries. He tackled the status quo. So if you take a look at his life and utterances and how he acted from that perspective, you'll understand the context in which I'm using it. They had to always have this balance, and that is something that I try to take lessons from, because there are times you have to at a strong position, but at the end of the day, you all of them, Nelson Mandela, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Kwame Ture, our very own Stokely Carmichael, and all the others that have gone. I mean, there have been those who have been more radical. But if you look at the ones who have made the sustainable kind of progress, they have had to know when to balance being radical with being diplomatic. You know, you look at John Smith, Tommy Carlos, and Peter Norman, they were peaceful, but look how iconic that has become. So I say that to say that you have to sometimes know what battles to lose, what battles to fight, and not lose sight that it's a war.
As we wind up, Mr. Lewis, last year when you came on the show, you came under the topic racial inequality and social justice. And let's bring it home to the Caribbean, and let's bring it home to Trinidad and Tobago. Racism, classism, sexism, colorism all exist within our society.
Right.
Do you think that our athletes can be as iconic as Carlos and his running partner to be able to stand up for all the isms that was just mentioned and probably some I forgot?
But everybody,
do you think that their voices?
No, as I was saying, everybody bring to anything in life their own experiences, perspective, passion, and triggers. You know, in Trinidad and Tobago, in the Caribbean, there are those who will argue that it's less about racism and more about classism and elitism. But the reality is that you can't force people to pick up a cause that don't matter to them. What you can do is educate people, bring awareness to, but at the end of the day, I can't blame any youth or young person who may focus and decide to focus on their careers and feeding their families, and may choose at a point in time to focus on that rather than focus on rocking the boat. You know, not all of us are here to do the same job, to do the same thing. Some are called to do different things. Those who are called and who are in a position to make a difference should do that. And I think in that regard that it is to the leaders, it is to you, it is to the leadership of Cano, my fellow directors, people like Alfonso Bridgewater, Yatania Wiggins, Edith Cox, Alan Sorrell, John Abrahamson Jr., Keith Joseph, Secretary General, to understand the honor and the privilege and opportunity that we are being given. It is to the leaders, they talk about the Caribbean, across the various sports and national Olympic committees, to understand that we have to lay the groundwork for the generations to come. We can't be part of continuing to sustain a system that discriminates against us. We in the Caribbean, more than any other. Yes, in Africa they left and came, but the Caribbean has been shaped, impacted by colonialism and slavery. So we ought not to need any prompting as leaders to understand We can't expect the youth and young people to do it. We have to set the stage like others who have gone before us have done. We can't shirk our responsibility. We can't put our own self-interest ahead of making a positive difference. Yes, there will be those who will argue with us. Yes, we may not become an IOC member or a FIFA big boy or big girl because we have taken certain stances or uttered certain things. But that's not what we have been given, the honor and privilege to lead, to be stewards. This is not about us. This is about the service that we have been entrusted with. Each one of us in the Olympic movement, in the Caribbean and sport movement, have been entrusted with a responsibility. We are stewards. We have a responsibility to make a better future for the youth and young people of the Caribbean. So don't ask me about putting that responsibility onto the youth and young people. That is our responsibility. That's your responsibility. And you have to do right by that responsibility. We have to ensure that governance is proper, because it makes no sense if we don't have what people may perceive the credibility, the legitimacy, or the moral authority to tell the IOC or FIFA what they should do when we ourselves can't stand exacting scrutiny.
Totally correct. Let us use the podium that life has given us, that there is no protest zone in that podium that life has given us, to continue to use God's talent and gift and purpose to be able to continue along, ensuring that 50.2 doesn't continue in our lives and in the lives that we directly and indirectly enrich and impact. Mr. Lewis, as always, it has been a pleasure. Thank you very much for starting off our series such a high note, noting that we don't want this to be, again, as I always say the last time, because we have a lot to continue to have discussions. Consistency in education is the key. And as always, I always like to pick your brain because, as always has been said, there's more in the mortar than the epistle. And we need to be able to hear, to be able and see what is there so we can continue and move forward. So wishing you safe journeys on your way to Tokyo, as well as God's richest blessings, safety to you and your family in these pandemic times.
Thank you very much. Many happy returns to you and all your viewers and listeners.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lewis.
Welcome.
Do have a great one and a great week ahead.
Thank you very much.
That was Mr. Brian Lewis. And let me make sure to recognize all of his positions. President of the Caribbean Association of National Olympic Committees, the President of the Trinidad Tobago Olympic Committee, and member of the Sport Integrity Global Alliance, who have taken the time to be able to help us understand a little more. As a matter of fact, for me, much more as regards to the topic that we have listed, Rule 50. Next week, we continue as we speak on transgender and intersex athletes. Another hot potato, Mr. Lewis would have said, as we continue along this journey to the start of the Olympics. And we ask you all to continue to join us on our Facebook and our Instagram, on our Facebook and our YouTube channel as we do this educational journey with you. It has been an utmost pleasure. We want to say thank you very much to all our viewers. And we say to you, God's richest blessings, be safe, be blessed, and see you next week at 4 p.m. ECT. Have a good one. Bye-bye.